You might think that managing one agent is hard enough, but the reality is most companies, there is now an explosion of AI agents, each running independently, often without any oversight or coordination. That is a recipe for disaster, confusion, risk, and of course, wasted efforts. Now, OpenHand is tackling this head on with their new agentic control plane designed to bring all those agents under a single pane of glass. And today we have with us Robert Brennan, co founder and CEO of OpenHands, to talk about how this changes the game. First of all, Robert, it's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I appreciate you having me.
It's my pleasure. Of course, we have hosted OpenHands before, so our audience, they do know about the company. But since you are here, so I would love to know a bit about what specific challenge you saw in the space which led to the creation of this company. Let's start there first.
Yeah, so we're really focused on helping folks graduate from prompting with agents to building processes with agents. I would say most developers today are comfortable kind of like piloting an agent on their laptop, pair programming, but that's not super scalable. It is a good lift in productivity for that like day-to-day ad hoc feature development. It typically gives like a 20 to 30% productivity boost. But there's a whole bunch of productivity gains to be had if you can start to run agents automatically, agents that run in the cloud in response to events coming out of third-party systems or running on a schedule, and don't need to take up space in the developer's brain. Right. For instance, you could have an agent that every Monday morning updates all of your dependencies or scans your repo for vulnerabilities. You could have an agent that listens to Datadog, and every time an error occurs, it immediately investigates the error and opens up a pull request to fix it. There's a lot of just like toil and rote work that goes into keeping a code base healthy, and no longer makes sense to have engineers, dedicating some portion of their attention to those problems. They're problems that can be easily solved by productionized agents.
Excellent, thank you. And that's actually, we also focus here to talk about not the hype, but actually how AI is going to production now. As I was talking about, the reality is that organizations, even individuals, or even SMEs, they don't run just one agent. And also it becomes kind of tempting, and actually in some cases actually better to have a specialized agent, even if it doesn't matter which model you're using for the specific task, because agents latest models actually are more troubling than the past models because they're trying to increase efficiency, which is actually crippling those models. Can you talk about, based on the insights you folks have about the industry, how many agents are most companies actually running at any given time on average?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we focus specifically on software development agents. So agents that are modifying code or, participating in the software development lifecycle in some way. I would say most companies right now, they're not running any agents in production. They are still kind of experimenting, prompting Claude code on their laptops. And that's a reasonable place to start. I would say the most forward-leaning companies are running, probably hundreds of agentic sessions per day, thousands depending on the scale of the company. Typically, they start with something like code review, something that's fairly easy, that's not going to make any changes to the code base, right? It's just basically every time a pull request gets opened, an agent is immediately triggered to go and review the code that's been opened up here, and decide, is this a change that's worth merging? Are there security problems here? Are there QA issues here? And that's a huge lift for the team, right? Code review is a huge bottleneck right now. But that's kind of like the first pass at putting an agent into production that's going to like trigger automatically rather than be piloted by an individual engineer. But very quickly, folks will start to expand beyond that one use case to a host of different use cases, right? Dependency management is a big one. Security vulnerabilities, solving security vulnerabilities is a big one. Doing pen testing is another big one. Managing things like release notes. There's a whole bunch of like toil that goes into the code base. So I would say typically folks start with like one code review agent that's going to run, dozens of times a day every time a pull request gets open, maybe thousands of times per day if you're a very large company. And they expand to other use cases and get more and more agents going.
What are some of the biggest challenges or headaches team face when they have to manage all these agents at scale?
Yeah, it's really tricky. I think a lot of teams start by like kind of hacking something together with like GitHub Actions and Claude Code. They'll kind of piece together the tools that they're used to in order to get something working. And that's great for like one use case, but it doesn't scale very well, right? What you really need is some centralized visibility into what agents are running. How are they performing? Are they being successful or not? How much are they spending? What's the security profile of these agents? And so the highest performing teams are building or buying a central platform in order to drive these cloud-based agents to work on. How do you provision a sandbox for the agent? How do you measure its spend? How do you measure its success rate, et cetera? And that's really where we focus on with our agent control plan at OpenHands is, really helping folks understand, okay, you've got a code review agent. We can see that 85% of its comments are getting accepted and merged into the PR. So it's a fairly successful agent. It spent $2,000 in the last month. That's going up 15% month over month. We can help you understand the ROI of each individual agent, so you can know, where are you actually getting value and where are you just burning tokens.
Now let's talk about the agentic control plane. How does it help teams keep tabs on all those agents? One more thing, I think a few days ago, Anthropic also released their agent manager. I think how is it different because organizations are realizing that agents are becoming a problem. So first of all, let's talk about your control plane, and then let's compare with what things like Anthropic are offering there.
So there's really two halves to the control plane, right? It's visibility and it's control, right? So number one, you just want to be able to know where are all these agents running, and what are they doing, how much are they costing, how is that changing over time? When you're patching together systems, and every team's patching together their own solution for running agents in production, you don't really have that visibility, right? You don't really understand what agents are out there, what are they doing, what's the security profile, et cetera. So getting that visibility, I think, is the first piece. And then it's about control. It's about understanding, okay, we see this agent is running, it's only got this level of success rate, right? This dependency updater agent is only getting 10% of its PRs merged. It's burning thousands of dollars worth of tokens. We need to shut this one down or iterate on it, make it better. Getting some control over like what models are being used, some control over like what the sandbox these agents are being put in is like, what secrets do they have access to, what tools do they have access to, being able to create separate environments for like an agent that needs, production level access versus an agent that just needs to do code review. That's really what the control plane is about, is giving the management team and the executive leadership a sense for what's happening here, right? You give the CFO some visibility into like, what are these agents costing, which ones are driving ROI. You give the CISO some visibility into like, what is the security profile here, which of these agents are actually dangerous, how are we running them, what models are we running with them. It's really about giving the whole team what they need to make intelligent decisions about a technology that is very powerful, very dangerous, and very expensive.
And how is it different from what Anthropic is doing with their cloud managed agents? It's kind of like building a harness around agents.
Yeah. So managed agents is really about that like orchestration layer, getting the agents firing on a schedule or in response to events coming out of the cloud. I would say one of the big downsides with going with Anthropic's platform, for instance, is that you're really getting stuck into a vertically integrated solution. And I think a lot of companies are realizing that they need to be able to switch between models, right? They don't want to be just an Anthropic shop or just a Gemini shop or just a Codex shop. The models are, fairly commoditized at this point, right? There's some differences in quality and speed and cost, but they're constantly leapfrogging each other. And very frequently, folks will build around the Anthropic ecosystem, and then OpenAI will come out with something, and they'll be like, "Oh, we need to like jump ship and rewrite all this stuff so that we can use the latest OpenAI model." And then they'll want to swing back to Anthropic later. So going with a vendor who is model agnostic, I think, is super important. And it also gives you some, if your team is naturally going to be using many different agents, right? Some people are going to want to use Codex. Some people are going to want to use Claude Code. Some people are going to want to use the OpenHands harness. Anthropic's not going to want to wrangle all that for you, right? You're going to want to have a third-party provider that can pull all of that into one place. And OpenHands does work with every harness out there.
Can you talk about some of the core features? And let's look at it from the perspective of teams. Core features of control plane that actually makes life easier for teams who are dealing with multiple agents.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing on people's minds right now is budgeting. People are starting to really see these bills pour in from their token spend. And so one of the things you get, immediately out of the box is the ability to set a budget at an organization level, set a budget at a individual user level, at a team level, and I think most importantly at like a use case level, or like a per agent level, right? You could say we want to spend this much on code review, this much on dependency updates, et cetera. I think that's the first thing that people look to, is like that's the problem that's most top of mind, is like, how much am I spending? Where is that spend going? Who's causing that spend? I think another big piece is increasingly agents aren't just being owned and piloted by individual engineers; they're being owned and piloted by the team, right? So a code review agent, for instance, it doesn't make sense for that to belong to me personally, or for me to have a separate code review agent from one of my coworkers, right? We want to be using the same code review agent on every single one of our repos, so that we're getting similar results, and whatever learnings that are happening in that process are spread across the entire team, right? So now that agent, we need to be able to control who has access to see what the agent's doing, to control its behavior, to decide what model it's using, to decide what its budget is. And so you get some role-based access control that allows, say the team manager to set the model and the budget. Maybe anybody on the team can change the prompts that drive that agent. So some of that access control, now that agents are really owned by the team rather than individuals, is really important. And then I think the biggest and most exciting piece is really this ability to measure ROI. This ability to take an agent and feed a success signal back into the system to understand how good is this agent? Is it actually delivering value to us, or is it burning tokens, right? So on our code review agent, for instance, we feed a signal back into the system about how often the comments that the code review agent made are actually getting resolved. Or we could feed back information about additional comments that were made by a human in a second pass review that maybe the agent missed, right? And so we can understand how accurate is this agent? What is the precision and recall of its comments? And we can actually see, because we have this data, we can see our accuracy rate going up over time for our code review agent, because we're constantly improving in response to those signals. So you get a feedback loop with the agent control plane that allows you to improve your agents over time.
As important as it is to manage these, there are certain things which are more about how AI works these days, depending on the industry, or even if you're not in the compliance or regulated industry. Governance has become a big challenge. Security, of course, is becoming a big challenge. How much access you should give or not give is a big challenge. Of course, hallucination is a big challenge. There's only so much you can do through the agent control plane. But how do you ensure at least some of the critical pieces, let's say security, governance, when so many agents are operating independently?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think this is one of the biggest boosts of the agent control plane, and I think security is it's becoming a bigger story now, and I think probably over the next year or so, it's going to become a very critical story. The nice thing about running agents in the cloud that are owned by the team, rather than running agents on everybody's individual laptop, is that everything in the cloud is like naturally sandboxed and adhering to principles of least privilege, right? When you're running an agent on your laptop, the agent has access to everything you have access to, right? It has access to all your files. It has access to, if you're connected to a production database, the agent can like muck around in there. If you're connected to a Kubernetes cluster, the agent can see that. So when you run an agent in the cloud, it gets its own sandbox, it gets its own environment, and you can specifically decide what secrets should this agent have access to, what system should it have access to, what MCP servers, what tool calls should it be allowed to make. And you can set that on an agent by agent basis. So you can have one agent, say, for doing incident triage that has access to your production Datadog, but maybe just has read-only access. You could have another agent which is just doing code review, and then it doesn't need access to Datadog at all, right? It just needs access to the code locally. So maybe it just has access to GitHub or something like that. So you can decide, you can basically lower your blast radius by cutting down what each agent has access to, right? We call this the principle of least privilege. It's been a principle in software development and security for a very long time. And I think we've kind of forgotten it when it comes to agents and are starting to remember how important it is. So yeah, a lot that can be done on the security side. I think there's also some really important things around like auditing, being able to retroactively look at what agents have done, see their traces, see their trajectories. And again, that's something that you really get from an agent control plane, because now you have a centralized place where all those trajectories are being stored. You can go back and look. If something does happen, you can decide, okay, what went wrong here? What did the agent do? Did it hallucinate? Did we give it too much access, et cetera?
How should organization look at AI and agents either differently or the same way we look at software, that is not as much about technology, it's more about having right practices, right processes, right culture in place?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think right now a lot of companies are in the experimentation phase, right? They're messing around. Their individual engineers are putting together little proof of concepts. They're wiring things together on their own laptop. Everybody has direct access to agents. I think that's good. I think we're still trying to figure out where we can get the most value from agents. But there needs to be a very clear process for taking something from the experimental phase, runs on my laptop. I was able to do this in one repo, to something in production, right? Where I can now take this agent and scale it across the entire organization, get it running automatically instead of running just on my laptop while I'm driving it. I think that having that kind of process of how do you take an agent from experiment to production is probably the most important process. I do think it's a little bit of a mistake to think about agents as coworkers or as employees. I think there's a famous quote from IBM that a computer can never be held accountable. And I think that's still very true, right? Even if we're getting more and more done with agents, I do think there needs to be a human being who is ultimately responsible for their behavior, so that when something does go wrong, it's not the CEO like trying to prompt his way back into a better state. There's somebody who's a great systems level thinker who understands how these agents have been set up, what they've been instructed to do, how they behave, who is looking at that system and figuring out, how am I going to re-architect this so that this problem doesn't happen again. I think there's always going to be a place for those that engineering mindset, whether they're working with source code or they're working with agents. Maybe we'll go from software engineers to robot psychologists, but I think there's going to be a need for that engineering brain.
Can you talk about what does the adoption look like for engineering managers or dev team today, and how, of course, it has been out for a while, and before that you may have run some beta tests with your users as well. What was their feedback? How did their day-to-day operation headache change, where they're like, no, this is actually solving one of the biggest problems that we're tackling there? So I would like to understand this two-point question. One is the adoption. The second is what is their reaction, their feedback?
Yeah, I would say there's a little bit of a tension between the platform teams who we typically work with on agent control plane, who are trying to put in some process and figure out how are we going to do this securely, how are we going to measure budget, things like that, and the individual engineers on the ground who just want to they want a blank check to run all the agents they want and do whatever they want, right? I would say we get a lot of great feedback from the platform team, who's like, hey, now I have eyes on this problem. I have a process to go from prompting to production. I have a platform here that I can now start to build on and really start to have a clear sense of this is how we run agents at our company. So the platform team tends to love it. I think because there are increased guardrails in place, we do sometimes hear pushback from individual engineers on the ground who feel like something's being taken away if they no longer have control over everything that's running on their laptop. If they're being pushed now to run agents in the cloud. I would say that is tempered by excitement that they no longer have to pilot every single agent that they're running. Right? They're able to take an agent that they've been manually typing into, saying, do the thing over and over and over again, do a code review over and over and over again on their laptop. and now that's just happening automatically in the cloud, and that does feel like magic. And I think that is enough to overcome the fact that that code review agent now has some more process, some more guardrails in place around it.
When it comes to general software development, developers are the king. They pick their tools, they pick their frameworks, and they make the decision, the right tool. When it comes to AI, is it trickle down or is it bottom up that organizations, because you have to sign mega $1 million contracts, right? It's not that, hey, you can just go sign up ChatGPT, because also about you have to put a lot of data, sensitive data, and you cannot just load everything in somebody's cloud, because even through API, all the data is going through that. So when it comes to AI, who is calling the shots? Is it top management, or is it still developers who are in power? What are you seeing in the market? What kind of struggle do you see there?
Yeah, so what we see is there's typically two workflows, right? There's for the devs who are, pretty much every developer is still running agents on their laptop, and I think that's not going to go away, right? For certain tasks where you don't have a clear definition of done, you're still kind of exploring the problem space. It makes sense to have a quick feedback loop running on your laptop with an agent. And there we see companies typically offering a menu of options to their developers and saying, hey, okay, we've got Cursor licenses, we've got Windsurf licenses, we've got Claude Code licenses. Like, pick the thing that works best for you. You're working on your laptop, like, this is your environment. The same way you've picked your IDE for years, you've picked your own local tooling. You can keep doing that with AI. But the company will typically have a set of licenses that you could pick from. But then in the cloud, when they're productionizing agents, that's when they center on a single system like OpenHands. They pick a single platform and say, hey, this is how we're going to take an agent that's being prompted on your laptop and productionize it so that it's running at scale automatically. And it makes sense. It's kind of similar to how, like, every developer could choose their own IDE, but the company would pick GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket as their Git provider, right? It doesn't make sense if I'm pushing my code to GitHub and you're pushing your code to GitLab. Like, we need to collaborate at that cloud layer, at that collaboration layer, right? And so that's where companies are really centering on a single platform to run their agents.
Do you see a future where there are going to be more AI agents than employees inside most organizations? Because this is what we're hearing from a lot of companies. Lay off all the people, get 2 or 3 employees, high-profile employees, and just a fleet of agents. So the job is to manage those agents versus hiring a lot of mid-tier or low-tier employees. Where do you see things are going?
Yeah, I do think there's going to be a lot of agents doing a lot of work, but I don't see them replacing humans. Agents are quite good at kind of the rote work when there's like a really clear specification of, like, this is what we want to build and this is how we're going to build it. The agent can go and execute that very, very well. But you still need, basically there's like two categories of human beings that are going to need, for as far as I can see into the future, going to need to be a part of the process and part of a company. One is on the product side. You need people with clear vision for, what are we building and what do we want to build? How are we going to build it? Agents are great at executing on specific instructions, but if you try and brainstorm with them, they come up with all sorts of wild ideas. Like, they're bad product managers. They're good aids for a product manager, but they're you wouldn't want to just like have an agent looking at all your user feedback and deciding what to do next. You'll end up with a Frankenstein of a product. So we're going to need humans on the product side, but then we're also going to need humans on the like systems level engineering side, right? You're going to have hundreds, thousands of agents all interacting with each other. There's going to be cost overruns. Production's going to go down. Things are going to tip over. Weird things are going to happen. And you're going to need smart people who are looking at these systems and figuring out, how are we going to re-architect this so that it's more stable, more secure, more reliable. So I think you're going to need those systems level thinkers, those good engineering minds. They're going to be one level of abstraction up. They're going to be getting a lot more done. But I like to say, we're going to have 10 times as much software in the world in a few years, right? We're going to need more software engineers to manage all that, right? We're going to be able to get a lot more done, but we're still going to need a lot of smart people thinking about what's going on here.
Talk a bit about what advice do you have for companies, all the way from board level, C-level executives to teams who are just starting not their AI journey, but their agentic journey?
It's still very important to experiment. and to enable individual people at the company to experiment. We see a very wide range of like AI skill sets. Some people are very eager to experiment and adopt, and like the running with agents just kind of makes sense to them, and they figure out how to use it very productively. Other people are a little bit more resistant, a little bit more stuck in their existing processes. So I think giving everybody within the organization the autonomy to experiment is really important. But I think there's also a really strong need to figure out, once you do identify a great use case for agents, how do you scale that across the organization? How do you actually productionize that? And that's where an agent control plane, really comes to play. Is that it gives you a process for taking something that one of your interns figured out a way to do X, Y, and Z with agents. How do we get that off of that intern's laptop and into prod? I think that's a really important process to have in place.
Robert, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your vision for agent management. And of course, those who are watching, please check out OpenHands to learn more about their agentic control plane. And once again, Robert, I would love to have you back on the show. Thank you.
That'd be great.